Have you ever felt that someone loved you, but you never heard the words? Have you ever waited for an "I love you" that never came, even from someone you were sure cared about you? Maybe from your mother, your father, or someone who is no longer here. And that absence of words left a void you still carry today without knowing exactly how to fill it. You wonder if you did something wrong, if you weren't enough, if that person truly cared. And the worst part is that now it might be too late to ask. This is the story of a man who spent his entire life resenting his mother for never saying she loved him. She was cold, distant, always too busy for hugs or affectionate words. He grew up believing he wasn't enough, that there was something wrong with him that kept even his own mother from loving him. He carried that wound for decades, letting it poison his relationships and the way he saw himself, until she passed away. And what he found in her bedroom, hidden inside an old box under the bed, completely shattered everything he thought he knew about love. Stay with me until the end, because this story may completely change the way you see the people around you. Sometimes, love doesn't speak. Sometimes it wakes up at 5 in the morning while you're still asleep, works in silence, and sacrifices without expecting recognition. And maybe, just maybe, you'll discover that you were loved all along in a way you never knew how to recognize. Maybe there's still time to look at someone differently. Or maybe this story will help you make peace with someone who's already gone. In a small town in rural Tennessee lived a man named James. At 45, he was a manager at a hardware store in Nashville. He had a stable life, a comfortable apartment, a car that ran well, and a routine that didn't demand much from him emotionally. He never married. He had a few relationships over the years, but they all ended the same way. The women said he was distant, unable to open up, as if there were an invisible wall around his heart. James knew they were right. He just didn't know how to change. The truth is, James had built that wall a long time ago, brick by brick, year after year, starting in childhood. And the person he blamed for it was his mother, Margaret. She was still alive, living alone in the same house where he grew up 3 hours away, but James rarely visited her. He called once a month, short, shallow conversations that lasted less than 5 minutes. "How are you, Mum?" "I'm fine. And you?" "Fine, too." "Do you need anything?" "No." "All right then. Talk to you later." It was always like that. Two people who shared blood, but nothing else. James didn't hate his mother. It was something worse than hate. It was cultivated indifference, a shield against the pain she had caused simply by not being what he needed. His childhood memories were of a woman who was always busy. Margaret woke up before sunrise, worked as a seamstress at home, and spent the entire day bent over a sewing machine. When James came home from school, she was sewing. When he ate dinner, she was sewing. When he went to bed, she was still sewing. He didn't remember hugs. He didn't remember bedtime stories. He couldn't remember a single time she had said, "I love you." His father had left when James was 4 years old. He simply walked out one morning and never came back. Margaret never talked about it, never explained, never cried in front of him, never mentioned the man's name again. James grew up believing that was coldness, that his mother simply didn't feel things the way other people did, that there was something broken inside her that made her incapable of love. And if she couldn't love her own son, then maybe the problem was him. Maybe he wasn't worthy of love. At school, James saw other mothers who hugged their children at the gate, who left sweet notes in lunchboxes, who attended meetings and applauded during performances. Margaret never did any of that. She showed up when it was mandatory, stood in the back with her calloused hands folded in her lap, and left as soon as it was over. James felt ashamed. Ashamed of his simple mother, the small house, the clothes she sewed for him because she couldn't afford to buy new ones. He didn't understand that those clothes were love. He didn't understand anything. At 18, James left for college in Nashville with a partial scholarship. At the farewell, Margaret stood on the porch, arms crossed, her face expressionless. She didn't cry. She didn't hug him. She simply said, "Study hard," and went back inside. James felt his chest tighten, but he turned that pain into anger. He promised himself he would build a life far away from that woman, far from that house, far from everything that made him feel invisible. And that's exactly what he did. The years passed. James graduated, got a job, climbed the career ladder. He went back home once a year at Christmas, out of obligation. The visits were short and uncomfortable. Margaret cooked, he ate in silence, slept in his old bedroom, and left the next morning. They never talked about anything that mattered. They never talked about the past, about the father who left, about the years of silence. It was as if they were two strangers who happened to share the same last name. And James told himself he was fine with that he didn't need her, that he didn't need anyone. On a Tuesday morning in October, James's phone rang at 6 a.m. It was the hospital in his hometown. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words hit James like a punch to the gut. His mother had suffered a stroke during the night. A neighbor had found her lying on the kitchen floor. Margaret was alive, but in critical condition. The doctors didn't know if she would make it through the next 48 hours. James hung up the phone and stood in the middle of his apartment, unsure of what he was feeling. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't panic. It was something strange, like a door he had kept locked for decades was being forced open from the inside. He got on the road that very morning. 3 hours of driving that felt like an eternity. The entire time, his mind drifted through memories he had buried long ago. The sewing machine humming late into the night, the smell of beans simmering on the stove when he came home from school, Margaret's calloused hands straightening his shirt collar before he left. Small fragments he had never considered important. Now, alone in the car, they returned one by one, like pieces of a puzzle he had always refused to put together. When he arrived at the hospital, Margaret was unconscious. Tubes and wires connected her fragile body to machines that beeped in a steady rhythm. James pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. He looked at his mother's aged face, the deep wrinkles, the hands that now seemed so small and fragile. Those same hands he had watched work non-stop throughout his childhood. He tried to remember the last time he had touched them. He couldn't. Maybe he never had. Margaret opened her eyes twice during the night. The first time, she seemed confused, unaware of where she was. The second time, her eyes met James's. She didn't smile. She didn't have the strength for that, but she moved her lips, trying to say something. James leaned closer, his heart racing. No sound came out. She closed her eyes again and fell asleep. The next morning, at 7:12 a.m., Margaret passed away. James was holding her hand when it happened. It was the first and last time he ever held that hand. The funeral was simple. Very few people attended. A few long-time neighbors, 2 women who used to order sewing work from Margaret, and the local church pastor. James stood beside the coffin, accepting condolences from people who seemed to know his mother better than he did. An elderly woman with white hair approached him and said something that left him speechless. "Your mother talked about you every day. She was so proud of the son who made it in the big city." James didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and looked away. After the burial, James went to his mother's house to take care of things. Paperwork, bills, deciding what to do with the furniture. The house was exactly as he remembered it, only smaller and quieter. The sewing machine was still in the corner of the living room, covered with an embroidered cloth. The kitchen still carried a faint smell of old spices. James walked through the rooms like a ghost, visiting his own past. Every object seemed to carry a weight he didn't know how to process. It was in Margaret's bedroom that everything changed. James was emptying the closet when he found a wooden box under the bed. It was old, with worn edges and a small brass lock. He forced it open with a screwdriver. What he found inside made his legs give out. He sat down on his mother's bed and stayed there, motionless, for almost an hour. Inside the box were notebooks. Dozens of old notebooks, yellowed with age, all handwritten in Margaret's shaky handwriting. And on the first page of the first notebook, there was a sentence that shattered everything James thought he knew. "For my son James, who will never read this, but who is the reason I wake up every day at 5 in the morning." James spent the entire night reading those notebooks. They were diaries, decades of words Margaret never spoke out loud, but wrote faithfully almost every night after James had gone to sleep. The first entry was from when he was 5 years old, 1 year after his father left. "Today, James asked where his dad is. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a child that his own father chose to leave? All I could do was hold him and go back to the sewing machine. I need to finish 3 dresses by tomorrow. That's the rent money. He doesn't understand yet, but everything I do is for him." The pages that followed told a story James had never known. Margaret woke up at 5 every morning, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to get everything done. She sewed until 7, made James's breakfast, sent him off to school, and went back to sewing until night. Every dress, every hem, every button she stitched was money for food, school supplies, and the clothes she made for her son herself. She wrote about the nights she cried in the bathroom so James wouldn't hear her, about the pride she felt when he brought home good grades, even though she didn't know how to show it. One entry from when James was 12 read, "Today, he asked me why I never say I love you. I froze. The words wouldn't come out. My mother never said it to me, and her mother never said it to her. I don't know how to do that. But I show it every day, in every way I know how. Will he ever understand?" James felt tears running down his face. He didn't try to stop them. He kept reading, page after page, year after year. The story of a woman who loved in silence because she didn't know any other way to love. There was an entry from the day James left for college. "I stood on the porch until his car disappeared down the road. Then I went inside and cried all afternoon. The house felt so empty, but I know I did the right thing. He'll have a better life than mine. He'll become someone. And that's worth every second of loneliness." James closed the notebook and held it against his chest. How many times had he thought his mother didn't care? How many times had he judged her for being cold, distant, incapable of love? And all that time, she had been there at 5 in the morning, sacrificing everything in silence. The last notebook contained more recent entries. Margaret wrote about the loneliness she felt, about the short phone calls that were the highlight of her month, about how she saved every photo of James she found online, printed on regular paper and glued into the last pages of the diary. She wrote about the pride she felt watching her son grow, even from far away. And in the final entry, written 3 days before the stroke, she wrote, "I wish I had been a better mother. I wish I had learned how to say the words, but I hope that one day, somehow, he knows. Everything I did was out of love." James stayed in that room until the sun came up. He held the notebooks as if they were the most precious thing in the world, and in a way they were. They were proof that he had been loved his entire life. Every stitch on the sewing machine, every sleepless night, every silent sacrifice. His mother never said, "I love you," but she showed it every single day, in every way she knew how. And he had been too busy resenting what was missing to see what had always been there. My friend, James's story is the story of many of us. How often do we judge people by what they don't say, completely ignoring what they do? Love doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in calloused hands, in sleepless nights, in sacrifices no one sees. Maybe there's someone in your life right now who loves you in that silent way. Maybe there's still time to recognize it. Or maybe you need to make peace with the memory of someone who's already gone. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like now. That simple gesture helps more people find this message when they need it most. Leave a comment sharing your own story. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who may be holding resentment towards someone who only knew how to love in silence, share this video with them. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this every week. And remember, sometimes love doesn't speak. Sometimes it wakes up at 5 in the morning. Learn to recognize it before it's too late.